guys. This is my first anatomy lecture since Corona apocalypse. So I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a bit like this right now. All nerves and eyeballs. So be patient with me. I'm trying to get this technology all perfected. I imagine that there will be some bumps along the way. I also really hate seeing myself on screen, so that's a bit distracting, but apparently it's better for you guys, so I'll do it. So today I'm going to finish the brain notes, which is, I really miss you guys already. It was one of my favorite things to lecture over, and it's definitely not as much fun lecturing to an empty room or the dog, and nobody laughs at my jokes. It's ridiculous. But here we are. We will make the best of it. Where we were last time. We were basically building the brain from the outside in, and what we had talked about was basically the cerebral cortex. I have the notes over here, not so I can read them or you can read them because you'll have them in front of you, but just sort of so you can use them to follow along, kind of like I do in class. So we were working on the cerebral cortex, and really what we did last time was we were working on the lobes of the cerebral cortex. And let's just review, because an awful lot of stressful things have happened since then. First off, let's show you guys a few things. This is the central sulcus, and the central sulcus separates the frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex from the parietal lobe of the cerebral cortex. And then this is the lateral sulcus, and the lateral sulcus separates the temporal lobe from these two, and I guess from this one as well. And then this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and that's the one that we said was really not super easy to see from a lateral view. You really kind of need a mid-sagittal view for the sulcus. So if there's anything out here way back in the back, just assume that I am actually talking about the occipital lobe, because I'm not going to try to trick you. I wouldn't anyway, and certainly not under these circumstances. So let's see where we were. So we basically were talking about, last time we said that this Prefrontal Gyrus right here, the function was the primary motor cortex. We'll come back to that in just a second. We also said, even though it's not labeled here, that this prefrontal cortex was the very last portion to develop, and it's like executive functioning and understanding the long-term implications of your decisions, those kinds of things. And then we did the motor speech area, which is Broca's area, right there. Okay, so let me just go back to this one real quick, and we didn't do all of this. There's more up there. We just learned the ones that I thought were relatively important, because you can just keep talking about the brain forever. All right, so the area right here is, again, anatomically called the Prefrontal Gyrus, because it's the gyrus in front of the central sulcus. And functionally, you describe it as, again, the primary motor cortex. And look, it's in blue here, and we're going to go to this picture, and it's still going to be in blue. And basically what we were saying, this is one of the things that we said last time, is that a bunch of the voluntary, basically skeletal muscle contraction of different portions of your body has been mapped to these regions that you can see right here. So all of these regions of the primary motor cortex. And some brilliant artists with a sense of humor decided to make a model of the portions of the body if they were the relative size of the space that they take up in your cerebral cortex. And this is the phenomenal model that came out of that. I would adore having this. This is called the primary motor cortex, and look at how much real estate the hands get, for instance, and the face gets. And it's here. It's in some museum in Europe. I would totally adore having this thing, but my husband would probably murder me if I put one more anatomical art piece in the house. Although, look at all these freaking guitars. Those are his. So, okay. So, primary motor cortex. So we did primary motor cortex, we did the prefrontal cortex, and then we did Broca's area. So that's what we're going to do out of the frontal lobe. So check, frontal lobe right there. Okay, next thing back is going to be the parietal lobe. So let's look at your parietal lobes, and they are from here to here. Okay, so they are going to be superior to the lateral sulcus, and really between the central sulcus and the parieto-occipital sulcus right there. Okay, and we're really only going to learn one little function out of the parietal lobe. It's kind of beneath the parietal bones, but of course the parietal bones start more up here, so it's mostly beneath the parietal bones. And so let's simplify its function, although it does far more than that, and say that the function that I need you to associate with the parietal lobe is sensation. So this is called the postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus. The postcentral gyrus is for somatic sensation. Okay, and so they actually call that the postcentral gyrus is somatosensory association area, but you can just say primary somatosensory cortex. Primary somatosensory cortex, that's what it's doing. So the primary somatosensory cortex is what you're going to learn out of that. This was the primary motor cortex, and that's in the frontal lobe, in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. And this is the primary somatosensory, as in somatic sensations, as in skin, muscle, bone sensations. Primary somatosensory cortex right here. And likewise, they have mapped, so look where we are right now. This is anterior, this is posterior. This is the primary motor cortex within the precentral gyrus, right? And we mapped that before. And that basically says that this side of your brain, the right side of your brain, controls the left hand. Oh, my mouse just died. Don't do that, mouse. Controls the left hand. So I'm just going to keep talking and try to reconnect this thing. Oh, the fun of technology. Okay, so this is the primary motor cortex in the precentral gyrus, and we just talked about that. But now I'm in the postcentral gyrus. I wish they had been consistent about that color as well, but it's kind of orangey, and here it's kind of orangey red. So now let's look at this one and say, okay, what we've done with the postcentral gyrus is we have mapped, for instance, sensation from my right hand to the postcentral gyrus right about here on my brain. Okay, so notice that somatic sensation has different levels of real estate, just like somatic motor, right? Because of course I have a lot of motor control of my hands and on my face, but I don't have a whole lot of motor control, for instance, of my elbow or my knee, right? Sensory. I have a lot of sensory, conscious sensory association. Sorry for confusing you guys. Conscious sensory association of my hand, so I can like feel a lot that's going on with this hand, and I would feel it over on this side of my brain. Okay, and I have a lot of sensory capacity for my face and for my tongue, and it can be mapped to a specific region on this portion of my brain in the postcentral gyrus. We call that the primary somatosensory cortex. And that same brilliant artist had to make an amazing sculpture of the primary somatosensory cortex made into a model in which each of these sensory locations got the same proportion of the body. So remember our motor one right here? And now look at the next one and see if you can tell any difference between the sensory one and the motor one. First off, you got a lot of ear sensation, you got like hand sensation, face, tongue, and then you got some junk sensation, which is literally why you're around, okay? So this is basically the primary somatosensory cortex in the postcentral gyrus made into a very entertaining model, which I would love to have in my house, although it would cause lots of questions, I imagine. Okay, so that is the parietal lobe, and specifically the location in the parietal lobe is the postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus, okay, and its function is the primary somatosensory cortex. All right, so now let's move to the temporal lobes. Okay, the temporal lobes are here. Okay, and the temporal lobes are beneath the lateral sulcus. So if you look at a lateral view of the brain and go beneath the lateral sulcus, you will see the temporal lobes. And their primary function is hearing, which is easy to remember because they're kind of right under your ears. And they also are smell. What happens in this location, your hearing and your auditory memory is there. Auditory memory, so like remembering what something sounds like. And then word processing is there, not not motor speech, because that was here in Broca's area, but understanding the meanings of words and processing the meanings of words is there. And then hearing and auditory memory, as I mentioned, and also word retrieval. So coming up with the word that represents the idea that is in your head is in this temporal lobe right here. So specifically, I want to show you this location right here. It's kind of at the boundary between the parietal and the temporal lobe, and it's called Wernicke's area. Apparently, you're supposed to say the W as a V, and one of my students who speaks German corrected me. So it looks like Wernicke, but it's Wernicke's area, and it's right there, and it's actually considered part of the temporal lobe. Wernicke's area is usually only on the left side in most of us. And it's really for processing speech. It's the part of the temporal lobe that does speech processing and for language comprehension. So I'm going to show you guys another aphasia video. So we saw Broca's aphasia last time, and Broca's aphasia was if something goes wrong with this area right here. Something goes wrong with that area, you understand the question, but you have trouble with the motor speech to respond to the question, and that impacts verbal speech. It also impacts written speech, potentially. And one of you guys looked it up for me. I didn't think about it before, but it actually impacts sign language as well. So basically, this one says, I've got the idea, but I can't produce it. And this one says, I can produce it, but it's disconnected to the idea. So if I, for instance, thought about apple and I wanted to say the word apple to you, I could probably understand that an apple was a thing that you would eat, but I would not necessarily produce the word that had anything to do with the word apple. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys, I love this video, a video of someone who has Wernicke's aphasia, also called Fluent Aphasia, and hopefully you will be able to hear this really well on the video.
Hi Byron, how are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talked with the people for them over there. They're driving for them at the moment. They'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to get to
We will store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
At the moment they don't show a darn thing.
The iPad that we were doing. Like here?
That might change for me and change hands for me. It would happen. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was very good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for us, other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hands for him. Sometime. Am I talk of any more to saying?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope the world lasts for you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
That was Byron. Byron hopes the world lasts for her. I hope it lasts for all of us at this point. So what happened with Byron is that Byron had a stroke in Wernicke's area, and he lost his ability to really comprehend what was going on with speech. Both didn't understand what he was saying and also didn't understand what she was saying. And they understood some of them, right? He understood the nonverbal cues to respond to speech, but didn't really have much connection to the meaning of the patterns that he was producing in his speech. So that's Wernicke's aphasia. And Wernicke's, they call that the language comprehension area right there. Okay, so, and that is considered part of the temporal lobe. Okay, and then this little last area of the cerebral cortex is right here between these two, right? So what they're doing right here is they're pulling the frontal lobe away from the parietal lobe and showing you that there's actually a little bit of cerebral cortex in there. Let me show you what it looks like in a different picture, even though this picture isn't actually trying to show that. Let me show you. Okay, so look at this picture for me. So this is a coronal section of the brain, and notice that this coronal section of the brain, hold on just a second. Coronal section of the brain right here. Okay, so what I'm doing right here is this coronal section of the brain. This is all cerebral cortex, right? And it looks like it's going still through the frontal lobe, and then you get a little bit of the temporal lobe. But the temporal lobe, the frontal lobe folds in. Here's the lateral sulcus, and then this little bit of cerebral cortex that's inside right there, this is the insula. It is a separate lobe, teeny tiny little lobelet really, of the cerebral cortex, even though it's folded in there. So let's find it again on that other picture. Okay, come back here. Okay, on this picture you can see it right here. So here's the insula. The insula is a really interesting part of the brain. First off, it's deep to the lateral sulcus. Go inside the lateral sulcus and you'll find some more cerebral cortex. Its function is really interesting. They've been studying it a decent amount lately. It is both awareness of like, sort of where your body is in space. It's also got a little bit to do with memory. There's like 10 different parts of the brain to do with memory. Taste is in there. This is where your taste sensation is. And in addition, they figured out that this region right here, the insula, and a portion of the insula right there, has to do with feelings of disgust. So when something smells like puke or poop, or smells like it's spoiled, evolutionarily it was really, really good to recognize and avoid that smell. And so those feelings of disgust are mapped to there, but they have, interestingly, especially like with what's going on right now in the world, well, many things are going on in the world, they figured out that that feeling of disgust extends past just straight sensations to, we can categorize other groups of people as disgusting, and therefore they are easy for us to avoid and make other. So this has to do with, for instance, biases. This region of the brain has to do with biases, and they've done some experimentation that says, oh, what can I do to change your bias about this person? Well, if I can do anything to personalize the person, then sometimes they don't activate the insula and cause you to feel disgust, and then you're shut down to that person, which I just find is absolutely fascinating. So anyway, that's the insula, and that is the last portion of the cerebral cortex. And again, it is body awareness, a little bit of memory, taste is in there, and then feelings of disgust. Okay, so let's talk about this last little thing. So this gets memeified quite often. So what about this whole left brain, right brain thing? Is that actually a thing? If it fits into a meme, it's probably not real science, but I mean, maybe it's sciencey. So let's see whether it's science or sciencey. So I'm sure you guys have seen this. I bet one of you guys even has it on your laptop. Okay. So the whole left brain, right brain thing. So is left brain, right brain an actual thing? So here is where all of this came from, and then what, the limitations of the meme. Typically speaking, the left half of our brain has more of these functions located within it, realizing that in about 20% of people, the sides are flipped. So the left brain has to do with pattern recognition and pattern creation and those kinds of things. So language is a pattern, okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you. Math is obviously a pattern, right? Figuring out what things mean and how the patterns can change if you manipulate the members of the pattern. This side of your brain really likes to figure out the missing portion of a pattern so that it can predict what will happen in the future. I don't know if you guys can read this, but this is what this meme says about the left brain. I am the left brain. I am a scientist, a mathematician. I love the familiar. I categorize. I am accurate, linear, analytical, strategic. I am practical, always in control, a master of words and language, realistic. I calculate equations and play with numbers. I am order. I am logic. I know exactly who I am. So, typically speaking, they assume that scientists and mathematicians and things are, those kinds of people are left-brained. So what is in the right brain? And then what are all of us? What is in the right brain? Typically in about 80% of the people, more located in the right brain are your visual spatial abilities, turning things around 3D in space, figuring out how things would look if you change some orientation in space. Your visual creativity is over there, your facial expression, recognition, your generating and understanding the emotional content of language is in that side of the brain in most people. So odor discrimination is over there as well. So what happens over here is you understand and produce the patterns of speech, and here you impart the emotional content to speech. So in order for someone to, for instance, have a normal social speaking pattern, you would actually have to use both. So what happens, a disorder in the left side, since both Wernicke's and Broca's, and that speech is mostly in the left side, if you have something that damages the left side of your brain, it usually results in aphasia, which is some kind of speech change or interruption. Now, what happens if something happens on the right? Well, many things could happen, but just to let you understand this, you could still, for instance, speak, and you might speak the words you meant to, and you could actually come up with the words, but you can't impart emotional content to your language. In addition, face blindness can also occur in the right side of the brain as well. So what's true? Am I left brain? Am I right brain? Well, it's obviously not going to be as simple as this lovely meme. Variation between people is common. For instance, I told you that only 80% of people have left-right lateralization like this. Women have less lateralization than men, meaning that there are more right typical things on the left half and left typical things on the right half. The good part about that is that women tend to recover functionality from strokes a little more easily than men. What's true is that all of us are both brained, unless you're missing half your brain. But what is also true is that you have predispositions that can be both culturally and behaviorally reinforced. For instance, I tend to be a relatively left-brained person. Why is that? Is it because I am really good at patterns? Well, yeah, I'm pretty good at patterns. I'm really good at language. Yeah, I'm pretty good at language. But also because I was constantly reinforced for those things. And when I'm constantly reinforced for those things, of course, I try them more often and develop more expertise with them. I have never had a predisposition to being good at visual spatial things. It's not my thing. I admire those of you who do. And I was never reinforced for those things. So there's both a predisposition and then sort of a societal reinforcement. And then we have to acknowledge that, of course, this is culturally influenced. Although most anatomical structures, most physics discoveries, most scientific discoveries and mathematical discoveries that are in books now were discovered by white men. Does that mean that people of color and women had less ability to do those things historically? Or could it have something to do with access to those kinds of education reinforcement for those kinds of behaviors. Okay, just a question to throw out for you. I'm not requiring you to come up with an answer, but I do think it's an interesting question. So, left brain, right brain. It's sciencey, but it's not science. Okay, so now let's talk as we move in. So this is where we have been. Remember our squishy, yummy brain. We are moving in from the cerebral cortex, which is where we have been, to the white matter. The white matter of the cerebral cortex is sometimes called the central white matter. And the central white matter is the white matter that connects the portions in the cerebral cortex. Let's go back to the metaphor that we used before. I said way back at the beginning of this that basically the gray matter, the neuron cell bodies, are the processors. They're like taking the sensory information and processing it and figuring out, oh, that's too hot, you need to move your hand. And then the white matter carries information to and from the processors. So now we're going to go into the white matter and sort of look at what the white matter is. So when you go into the white matter, you're not going to learn all of these tracts. I'm just going to have you learn 3 different categories of tracts. So it's deep to the cerebral cortex. It's bundles of myelinated axons. If it was outside the central nervous system, it would be called a nerve, but since it's inside the central nervous system, they're called tracts. Does that do you remember that? I hope you do. Okay, so let's go inside the central nervous system and look at the types of tracts that exist. Okay, so all of this is trying to show you is I want you to imagine that these are myelinated axons. These are myelinated axons. These are myelinated axons. I'm not going to have you learn that one, but I will have you learn the other ones. So, what are we going to talk about? So basically, there are going to be 3 different types of tracts that you are going to learn. And what these tracts are is that wiring connecting different portions of the nervous system to other portions of the nervous system. So the first one that I want to show you, let's do the commissural tract first, because that'll be a good way to sort of, okay. So this guy right here has wiring that connects the left and the right halves of the cerebral cortex. And so it goes through the middle. That guy right there is called a commissural tract. So it connects the 2 cerebral hemispheres together. So a fantastic example of a commissural tract, just to put this together so that you'll have a much better visual, is our friend, the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum that you're seeing right here is, this is, I think that's anterior and posterior. This is left half of the cerebral cortex. This is right half. And this is the commissural tracts that are running through the corpus callosum, right? So this is all the white matter wiring that is connecting the left and the right halves of the cerebral cortex. So this is a fantastic example of a commissural tract is the corpus callosum. Okay, now let's do some other types of tracts. Okay, 2 more. These tracts right here, do you see them? They're going top to bottom, bottom to top. These guys right here are called projection tracts. And projection tracts would, for instance, carry information up from the spinal cord to the cerebral cortex. So up from the spinal cord to the cerebral cortex. So you're going to find a boatload of projection tracts going up and down within, for instance, they go from the cerebral cortex all the way down the brainstem and out the spinal cord. There's a whole bunch of projection tracts in here. This little guy right here is where they cross. And they cross because they actually start out flat and then cross during development. That is the reason that things on the left side of my body are actually detected in the postcentral gyrus and the somatosensory cortex on the right side. It's not because they cross in the brain, they actually cross right here in the medulla oblongata long before they get to the cerebral cortex. Likewise, things that happen in the left side of my body go to the cerebral cortex from this side, and they come from that side as well. So you have learned this before, but this little thing right here is called the decussation of pyramids. I don't think I wrote it in there. Maybe I wrote it later. I don't usually make you come up with that because it's really long. So that guy right there is the reason that the halves of the brain and the portions of the body that they coordinate to are switched, because the white matter tracts actually flip right there. Okay, so so we've got commissural tracts, that was this guy right here. We've got projection tracts, that was these guys right here. And there's more of these, but I'm just showing you. And then we've got one other tract that I'm actually going to have you guys learn. And those tracts are called association tracts. They call them longitudinal fasciculi right here, but they just changed that, so don't even worry about trying to change it. So these guys right here, do you see, are tracts that connect different regions within the same cerebral hemisphere. So I want to call those association tracts, and that's what most textbooks call them as well. So if, for instance, something was going from my parietal lobe where, oh, did I forget the parietal lobe? Oh, poop, I'll have to go back and get it. The occipital lobe, where vision occurs, to the frontal lobe, where I can think about what seeing that actually means, then it would go through one of these tracts, from the occipital up to the frontal, from the frontal to the occipital. This is, by the way, a cool space-filling model that somebody made of all the tracts. Obviously, this guy right here, these are going to be right here. Those are going to be projection tracts. This guy right here, hopefully you can tell that that would be a commissural tract. And then the ones that you're having trouble seeing because you're looking at a frontal view, the ones going anterior to posterior within a hemisphere, those are going to be association tracts. I just realized that I forgot something, sorry. It wouldn't matter if I was in front of you, I would have just gone back and done it, but considering everything's a little weird now, I apologize. But I'm not going to re-record this. Okay, I did forget something important. Let's go back and get it. I know it's still, there it is, right there. Okay, I forgot the occipital lobe. And you guys can find it, it's not that hard. I didn't tell you what it did though. You might already know. The occipital lobe right here. The occipital lobe is, of course, posterior to the parieto-occipital sulcus. That's how you find it. And its function is vision. So vision, if you are consciously aware of something that you see, it is because it actually goes to the occipital lobe of your brain. Okay, that's where conscious awareness of vision, and there's a bunch of different parts to vision in there, but just vision. So one more time, since we're here and I came back here anyway, let's review for just a second. Okay, so reviewing the lobes of the cerebral cortex, a little bit of structure function. Of course, this is the frontal lobe, right? I want to draw another arrow. Okay. Oh no, Melanie. I like this tool, but it definitely has a learning curve, and you guys have to be part of the learning curve, sorry. Okay, so, son of a biscuit. Okay, so this guy right here is frontal lobe. Functions of the frontal lobe. Well, executive function, math, thinking through things, understanding things, that's in the frontal lobe. So is voluntary motor activity in the Prefrontal Gyrus in the frontal lobe. And then this, remember, that was Broca's area, that's the motor speech area. So all of that goes on in the frontal lobe. So now let's move back to the parietal lobe. The only thing that you guys had to know about the parietal lobe is the Postcentral Gyrus, which is the primary somatosensory cortex. So sensation is back there. What's going on here in the temporal lobe, both hearing, hearing and speech primarily, okay? And then Wernicke's area, which is the speech comprehension part, is considered part of the temporal lobe. The insula was taste, a little bit of memory, also body awareness and sensation, and then disgust was back there, and then what's in the occipital lobe is vision. So even though I screwed up and forgot the occipital lobe, we got a little review out of it, so we'll be fine. Okay. All right, so temporal lobe. Okay. So then we did the central white matter, all well and good, got that. So that's all we really have to know is those three different types of tracts in the central white matter, and I think we're good with those. By the way, this table, not good to look at on the screen like this, but this table can also help you to understand. I don't call them longitudinal fasciculi. Maybe I should change in the future, but that looks hard. Okay, so now we are going to move a little deeper, and I don't tell you very much about these because they're so complicated. Structure and function. I just want you to be able to find them and know a little bit about what they do. You won't have to know them individually. So let's review sort of where we are. Hold on. Okay, so let's figure out where we are before we learn anything new. So what we said was, okay, so we did the cerebral cortex, yeah? So this is all cerebral cortex, that's all good, okay? Then we did the white matter. This would, for instance, be the corpus callosum, which is a commissural tract. This looks like a projection tract to me. Don't worry about which one, doesn't matter, okay? So we did gray matter, white matter, and now we're gonna do some more gray matter. So do you see this more gray matter that you've got there? Let me draw a little arrow. A little arrow. Oh, Melanie. Ooh. Okay, so this gray matter there, the paired gray matter that is in either side, so these are all part of it. They're not color-coded on this side, but these are all part of it. This one isn't. I'm not going to make you label them individually, but these are all paired chunks of gray matter within the halves of the cerebral cortex. So it goes gray matter on the outside with just cerebral cortex, and then the white matter, and then more gray matter on the inside, and that's what we are. These are called cerebral nuclei. A nucleus, remember, is a chunk or a collection of neuron cell bodies within the central nervous system. They're also sometimes called basal nuclei, or people incorrectly don't use this. I just want you to understand in case you run into it in the future. They call them basal ganglia. Why is it incorrect? Well, because ganglia, by definition, are in the peripheral nervous system, not in the central nervous system. So you call them basal nuclei or cerebral nuclei. I like cerebral nuclei because they're within the cerebrum. So only reason I want you to know anything about them is because you actually care about them in your life. So they are internal structures of paired gray matter deep within the brain. They're like below the lateral ventricles, sort of lateral to the third ventricle, medial to, right, this is the insula right here, so they're medial to the insula. And so they do a couple of things. The things that you will care about is fear and vigilance, which we're all kind of feeling right now, is in one of these little bastards. This one's called the amygdala, or the amygdaloid body. That's your nothing's okay portion. I imagine our amygdalas are getting quite a bit of blood flow lately. So that's in there. So emotion, fear, and vigilance. In addition, one of these, I won't make you memorize which one, is also responsible for starting and stopping voluntary movement. So what would happen is the cerebral cortex would say, I want to move my hand, and then you send it to one of these guys, and this one says, okay, hand movement started, and then the hand movement starts. Well, if this one goes bad, one of these, it can cause Parkinson's disease. So in addition, they're all, some of them are part of your like limbic system that has addiction and that kind of stuff in there. So that's why I thought you guys would find that interesting. In addition, Tourette's syndrome is also associated with one of these, starting and stopping motion and that kind of stuff. So really all you need to do with these is, if I show you these chunks that are right here, that one's a different one. I won't ask you that one though, don't worry. These chunks, those are called cerebral nuclei, gray matter paired deep within the cerebrum. Cool? Okay, I will not make you learn the individual names of them, I promise. Okay, so let's see. All right, so now we are going to move deeper still, and we are going to move to the central chunk of the brain just to sort of show you where we're going. The central chunk of the brain is going to be called the diencephalon. You guys already did this in lab, so this is probably not terrible for you today, and that's definitely not as easy as if I were in front of you. All right, so let's move deep within the brain right here. Okay, this region right here that is outlined in purple, right here, that is all the diencephalon. Now, that could be confusing because you're thinking, oh, that's the chicken head. You told me the chicken head was the third ventricle. Well, the third ventricle is a space, and the space is, let's see if I can do this. Okay, the space is, each of these structures are concave, and then it leaves room for a space in between. The space is the third ventricle, but the chunks on either side, the actual physical structures on either side, this is all diencephalon. Okay, the diencephalon is right smack in the middle of the brain. Here's the cerebrum, here's the corpus callosum, right? This is going to be down to my brainstem. So whatever area that you run into that's in the middle of the brain and is not brainstem and not cerebrum is the diencephalon. And the diencephalon is going to consist of primarily the words with thalamus in them. So let's talk about the three portions of the diencephalon. So the diencephalon is composed of the thalamus, and the thalamus is right here. Okay, this hole right here, this is the intermediate mass of the thalamus, which connects the two halves of the thalamus. It is also composed of the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is right here, okay? And the pituitary gland hangs off of the hypothalamus. That's that optic chiasm that is kind of anterior to the hypothalamus. And then the last little bitty part is this part right here, which is called the epithalamus. And the reason that you'll care about the epithalamus is primarily because it has the pineal gland, which secretes melatonin when you're supposed to get sleepy and start getting ready to go to bed. So thalamus, let's talk about the thalamus for a second. So what does the thalamus do? The thalamus, okay, this one right here, it actually doesn't look like this. I know you see it in lab as looking like that, but I want to show you kind of what it really looks like. I'm not going to try to confuse you with quizzes. I just kind of want you to get an understanding. So let me show you another picture that shows you a different view of the thalamus. You will probably be tested on it that way, but let's figure out what it actually looks like real quick. Okay, so in this picture, what you are actually seeing is, dang it. Okay. Oh, son of a biscuit. Okay. So, do you see, this is the cerebrum, and then they took all of the cerebrum off, and this is what you have left. The thalamus is right here, right? This is the hypothalamus that you're seeing. But then if you look at a lateral view, the thalamus actually is two kind of pointy egg-shaped structures. They're lateral to one another, and then the third ventricle is going to be between them. So this is what the thalamus actually looks like. It's bigger than what you see just from a medial view. From a medial view, all you see is this, right? So this is the thalamus, but it goes deeper than that. You're looking at the inside of one of those two eggs, or a medial surface of one of those two eggs. So the thalamus is these big blobby things right there. And then in this picture, let's find the other two things as well. In this picture, let's find the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus has the mammillary bodies. I can't imagine why they were named that, can you? The mammillary bodies are actually part of the hypothalamus. They're right there, okay? Here you couldn't see them because this is a posterior view. And then the epithalamus, or pineal gland, is right there. So look at these are anterior, posterior pictures. Okay, so let's talk about So let's talk about what's actually going on. Oh, no, that's good enough. We'll do it that way. Okay, so the thalamus, let's talk about what it does, and then what the hypothalamus does, and then what the epithalamus does. So back to this picture just a second. So what does the thalamus do? The thalamus, it's really a relay station between the sensory information that comes in, trying to relay it to the right place in your cerebral cortex. So, for instance, if I were feeling something in my right hand and I need to get it to the postcentral gyrus on the left side of my brain, imagine that this goes, oh, that's hand. I'm going to send it to the right place. So it is, it's a relay station for sensory information, or like a router. Does router make more sense to you guys? Then the hypothalamus right here, right? So this is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is actually a whole bunch of individual little nuclei, but I definitely won't make you look at those. And its primary function is really homeostasis. It does so much. When you guys take physiology, you never stop talking about the damn thing. So homeostasis is big picture. That's why in your notes I kind of put some things in all caps, because it gets really complicated and I wanted to simplify it for you. So if you only remember one thing about the hypothalamus function, remember homeostasis. But let me elaborate. So homeostasis, this portion regulates sleep, hunger, thirst, body temperature, some of your emotions, some of your behavior. Your sex drive is partially there. Rage, this little guy helps the amygdala out with rage. It also regulates the autonomic nervous system. It regulates the pituitary gland secretion, and it produces two of its own hormones. So it's a busy little monster. And it's not very big, and it's not very anatomically impressive, but it sure is important. So that's your hypothalamus. And then the last portion is just right here, the epithalamus. And the epithalamus really is primarily the pineal gland. There's something else to it. You don't have to worry about it. And the pineal gland secretes melatonin, which helps you regulate sleep-wake cycles. So that's the diencephalon. One more time, the diencephalon, right, is kind of in the center of the brain. It's medial to the cerebrum, right, and it's superior to the brainstem. And everything has the word thalamus in it that is related to the diencephalon. Okay, so you guys can see where it is right there as well. Okay, and then last portion of the brain is the brainstem. Well, the brainstem, and then we'll do the cerebellum, which kind of develops laterally to it. Okay, so let's talk about where the brainstem is. So if you look at where the brainstem is, so let's look at different picture first. Okay, so if we want to see where the brainstem is, let's start with this picture. So everything from here on down until you hit the foramen magnum is actually brainstem. Not the cerebellum, but everything in the stem on the way down is actually brainstem. So the brainstem is going to consist of all of these structures from here on down. Now, not this guy, because that's actually kind of misleading, because the hypothalamus right there is actually further back. It's like back up, but you can't really tell how deep it is. So let's look at it from this perspective. So if you figure out where let's look at it here first, even though this is trying to show you cerebellum. So let's look at, so brainstem would be everything from here on down, with the exception of the cerebellum. Okay, so let's figure out what's actually in the brainstem. All right, so don't worry about this picture. This is confusing to everyone, including me. What do you have once you get into the brainstem? You've got the superior portion of the brainstem right here is the mesencephalon, also called the midbrain. Let me just remind you that I asked you guys to call this the mesencephalic aqueduct. And the reason I asked you to do that is because it runs through the mesencephalon. So one of the ways I can tell when I'm in the mesencephalon is the aqueduct is right there. So what does the mesencephalon or the brainstem have associated with it? It's got these two, and you saw them in lab. These are the superior and inferior colliculi. Collectively, those are called the Corpora Quadrigemina, right here in your notes. You can also see them on this posterior view right here. So see the two little butts right here that are just below the pineal gland? Those are the superior and inferior colliculi. Collectively, they are called the Corpora Quadrigemina. We don't usually use tectal plate. You can use it if you want to. It's actually kind of incorrect. What do these do? These are visual and auditory reflexes. So if something comes really fast at your face and you move away, that's a visual reflex. Or if something goes boom, or you maybe have an earthquake that shatters or things in your house, you have reflexes in response to that. These are not like conscious awareness, like getting up and going to a door frame. It's not a reflex, but big boomy thing coming at your face and moving your face away. That is a reflex. So superior and inferior colliculi are reflexes. And then these guys, which are right next to the superior and inferior colliculi, right here and right here, okay, those are called the cerebral peduncles. And the cerebral peduncles are like lateral, do you see, to the mammillary bodies, even though the mammillary bodies are a little further back, but lateral to the mammillary bodies. You can kind of see where they are right there. And the cerebral peduncles are primarily white matter projection tracts carrying information up and down through there as it's going to and from the midbrain, like to and from the thalamus or hypothalamus. So the information would be carried through these cerebral peduncles. And you start running into a whole bunch of cranial nerves once you get here. I put the cranial nerves in here not so that you can study them from the notes, but so when you're trying to figure out where the hell the oculomotor is and where the hell the trochlear nerve is, you've got these notes. Okay, can you hear my dog snorting under the door? She wants to come in. Okay, so so the mesencephalon or midbrain, one more time. So that's one look at it. Here's another look at it right here. Is this region right here that has the cerebral, that has the mesencephalic aqueduct. And these are the superior and inferior colliculi. And then if I went lateral to this, I would run into the cerebral peduncles. And these are visual and auditory reflexes. Okay, and now we move down to this guy, which is the pons. What's actually going on in the pons? We'll look at this picture again, so don't look at that one. This picture right here is the pons. Do you see how it's got fibers running up and down and lateral through it? So the pons has both white matter and gray matter. The white matter is carrying information back and forth, left to right and up and down. So composed of both gray matter nuclei and white matter, like commissural tracts to go, right? Between the cerebellum sends information back and forth through there. Those are commissural tracts. I won't ask you that, don't worry. And these guys right here that are going up and down, those are projection tracts. And that's communicating between the cerebrum and all the way to the cerebellum, cerebrum, cerebellum. But either way, white matter tracts are in there. But then if you look inside, these are supposed to be nuclei. And the names of the nuclei kind of give you an insight as to what the pons does. There's a respiratory center right here. Okay, so what the pons does, I'll turn that off for the next time. Still learning. What the pons does is primarily it has nuclei within it that control breathing. The medulla oblongata will also help with breathing, but the pons controls breathing. So that's its function. And then we move down to the medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata is on this picture. Everything below the pons, right? But above the foramen magnum is medulla oblongata. And so if you looked up close at the medulla oblongata, inside it, you would run into, again, a bunch of individual nuclei. Don't worry, you don't have to know their names. I'm just going to show you this so you can sort of get the structure function put together. And now we're back to old, like, lizard functionality, life-sustaining functionality. Don't look at this picture, it's too confusing. This gives you an idea. This is supposed to be the medulla oblongata. You see it right there? This is trying to give you an idea of what it does. You will not be held responsible for this picture. I'm just kind of showing you what is going on in the medulla oblongata. It's got a respiratory group, cardiac and vasomotor centers, so don't be at all surprised that the primary function of the medulla oblongata is to help the pons with controlling respiration and then to control the heart and the vessels. So this is really old functionality, life-sustaining functionality way down in there. Okay, and then the only thing good about this picture is that although it's confusing as hell, it does show you this decussation of pyramids. That's what that's called. That's where the white matter crosses, and it actually crosses within the medulla oblongata. Okay, so breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, that's controlled there. Okay, and then there's some cranial nerves there as well. So you've got lots of little figures in your notes, especially since you're at home. I would definitely do the things, labeling and coloring, that I asked you to do. And then last little tidbit of the brain is just to talk about the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is this guy right here, right there. It's not very hard, so it's got two hemispheres, okay? This little wormy thing in the middle is called the vermis, which literally means worm. So this is a vermis, two halves, two cerebellar hemispheres. If this was still in the brain, you would have the falx cerebelli that would be folding in there. And then the folds in the cerebellum are different. They have different texture than the folds in the cerebrum. They're called folia, which means leaves. And then if you did a mid-sagittal section of the cerebellum, you would see this white matter pattern. The white matter pattern is called the arbor vitae, which means tree of life, because they used to think that the cerebellum was involved in life-sustaining functionality, but it's really the part of your brain that actually makes you coordinated or not coordinated. It maintains your posture and equilibrium. It coordinates your body movements. For those of you who are very, very coordinated, definitely not me. You have lots and lots of muscle memory that's really easily retrieved from your cerebellum. So when you learn something new, you're doing it with your cerebrum, but your cerebellum is really good at smoothing out patterns, and after you've done something a whole bunch of times, the cerebellum will help you make it smooth. So you use your cerebrum to initiate it, and then you start riding a bike, and then you don't think pedal, pedal, pedal. Your cerebellum remembers how to pedal. So that's your cerebellum functionality. That's what that does for you. Okay. And then last little tidbit, I'm not going to teach you a whole ton of this because it's really not very easy to learn from someone. It's something you kind of have probably already studied in lab anyway. But let's talk about cranial nerves. Oops. It's going to happen every time, I just know. So with cranial nerves, you already know, you've already studied, there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves that mostly do head stuff, but not exclusively. There is a table that I wrote that's in your lab manual that is specifically what you need to learn for your cranial nerves. So learn that, and that will be on your lecture exam. It's also on your lab quiz that you're probably having this week, although maybe the Tuesday people are having it next week. I haven't seen the schedule yet. Okay, and they are numbered, Roman numerals 1 through 12. And yes, you have to learn 12 Roman numerals if you haven't learned Roman numerals before. And they are named either for hole they go through or their functionality or something. And these are the names and the numbers. They are admittedly way easier to do on images and models than they are on actual brains. But guess what? Coronavirus means that you won't be tested over an actual brain. At most, you'd be tested over a picture of a brain that you had seen before. For me, I'm just going to test over an image, right? And in lab, they may test you over a cadaver photo that they have showed you and told you that you have to learn. But they'll be clear about that, so I'm going to let them work that out. Okay, so as far as the functionality of the cranial nerves, I like this picture just for basic functionality, although it's not called abducent, it's called abducens. So this is kind of a cool picture. I'll post this for you guys. Just to put structure function. I also kind of like, move out of the way, that one. This one's kind of cool because like it's got all of the functions, like number 1 is olfactory, number 2's are optic. This one moves the eyes, so that's oculomotor. Isn't that kind of cute? Number 12 is hypoglossal, which controls the tongue, so that's kind of cute as well. Stop doing that. I don't know how to make it not do that once it does it. Okay, so I like that picture. I'll probably post that for you as well. And then, so they're 12 pairs. They're part of the central nervous system. I'm sorry, they're not part of the central nervous system. They are directly connected to the brain, but they're part of the peripheral nervous system. And they are either sensory, motor, or both. And then you are responsible for, in lecture and in lab, identifying the cranial nerve by name, by number, by location, by basic function, and then whatever hole it goes through. I'm pretty sure you could figure out what hole that one goes through, right? Okay. That one, I wonder which hole it goes through. That's the same information for lab and lecture, and hopefully you've already studied that kind of stuff as indicated on your lab manual. So basically you're going to do the same thing. And the last thing I'm going to do today is take a minute to show you this adorable video. If you've already seen it, you can stop. Okay, it's this really cute cranial nerve song. Probably already seen it.
Cranial one gave me a whiff. What's that? Is that seated? Sensory nerve guides my steps. Olfactory is the way. Second nerve helps me see right. Central peripheral side. Sensory nerve for my eyes. Optic nerve is the way. Pupils constricting. Third nerve eyes moving. Prevents eye drooping. I could put a nerve, baby. The trochlear nerve. What's the superior open? This is the fourth nerve. Hard to look down if it's weak. Trigeminal nerve works. Mastication. Sensory and motor. Gives a face sensation. Abduce it sense. Does eye abduction. Motor nerve for motion. Completely double vision. Facial expression. Does facial expression. Sensory and motor. 2/3 of taste sensation. Vestibulocochlear, eighth body balancer, use of the ear, sound sensor, ear sensory, and head, glossopharyngeal nerve, senses taste from lower third, back of the tongue, the ninth nerve, it helps us swallow head, 10th nerve's vacant, lets us speak and say stuff, trusted only if this facial, it's sensory and motor, baby, accessory nerve, it's the 11th, so shrug your shoulders, anti head resistance, the hypoglossal nerve is the 12th nerve, gives me the movement, mnemonics, let's get to it, lower lip is top, top, German, half hip, some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter more, hip. This top, German, hot hip. Some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter more, hey.
So that's adorable. I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys, since you're stuck at home and I am too, if you make some delightful study tool like that, even if you just remade that, you will get another 5 points bonus on your test. If you collaborate with other students to make it, you will get 8 points bonus on your test. So anything, especially musical, silly, fun, to lighten up the thing that you could do.
The great enemy of writing isn't your...
Please feel free. You will have to share it with all of us though. So All right, so that's it for today. I'm going to upload this. You don't have to watch it all at one time. I know it's long, but this is how I used to do it. I want to change things up for you. Okay, I will see you in the near future. Take care of yourself and wash your hands, you filthy animals.